IMF vows to continue working with Ecuador following the defeat of a government's austerity decree. Bolivia gears up for Sunday's presidential polls. And Grenada to ban e-cigarettes and smoking in public places. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo and this is from the Sun. Following the defeat of the Ecuadorian government's austerity decree, the International Monetary Fund says it will continue to work with the country. On Twitter, the IMF said it firmly supported President Lenín Moreno's efforts to reach an agreement that protects the most vulnerable, and that it would work closely with his government to find the best way of ensuring what it called fiscal sustainability. In February, President Lenín Moreno agreed to a $4.2 billion bailout agreement with the fund. Lifting fuel subsidies and other austerity reforms were part of the deal.
We very much welcome that there is an attempt to bring in all the stakeholders and to make decisions about macro reforms, taking into account the various communities that are going to be affected by it. So quite simply, we stand ready, we stand in support of the authorities. These are challenging times, and we would like to see that the reforms get done and that they are successful.
The Venezuelan president, Nicolás Maduro, has congratulated the Ecuadorian people for what he called a great victory over the IMF. He said it was ridiculous to think that their huge protests could have been organized by Venezuela.
The people of Ecuador, like the people of Venezuela, said no to the International Monetary Fund. And the people of Ecuador had a great victory against the International Monetary Fund. They twisted the arm of the International Monetary Fund. They say that Maduro directed the protests in Ecuador. It's ridiculous to say that. It was not Maduro. It was the people of Ecuador, the indigenous movements, the campesino movements, the youth. The struggle and the victory belong to the people of Ecuador.
Independent media in Ecuador have condemned the government's attempt to silence and criminalize their coverage of last week's huge protest. A diverse platform of alternative outlets says they were able to break the mainstream media's silence on the repression by the police. It says their coverage from the scene is entirely verifiable, but that several of their members suffered censorship and police raids. They supported the demands for the Interior and Defense ministers to be sacked. In Bolivia, campaigning for Sunday's presidential election is coming to a close. President Evo Morales is holding his final rallies in Cochabamba and later in El Alto. On Tuesday night, the main candidates closed their campaigns in the capital, Santa Cruz. At a big rally with his MAS party, President Evo Morales called for calm and unity in the face of attempts by violent sections of the opposition to undermine the election. He said the large turnout reflected the true desires of the people in the eastern city. Small groups of opposition supporters tried to disrupt the ruling party's rally, but they were dispersed by the police. The opposition has threatened not to recognize any victory by President Evo Morales and has called for the National Electoral Court to be replaced.
Santa Cruz, su pueblo pacífico.
The people of Santa Cruz are peaceful. Those who try to incite violence are attacking democracy, not party. The people of the world are seeing where this violence is coming from small groups. Brothers and sisters, while we're united, we will keep on defeating those people who don't love the people of Bolivia.
The main opposition candidate, Carlos Mesa, also held a closing rally in Santa Cruz. The opposition is running around 10 points behind President Morales in the opinion polls, and it is divided among 8 different candidates. However, Mesa insisted he was confident of his victory. More than 7 million people in More than 7 million people in Bolivia are eligible to vote, and electoral authorities say preparations are going according to schedule. Our correspondent, Freddy Morales, in La Paz, has more.
The electoral campaign ends today. From midnight, all political campaigns is banned to give way to a period of electoral silence ahead of elections on Sunday. Bolivians will go to the polls to elect their Congress and their government for the next 5 years. President Evo Morales will end his campaign in the city of El Alto, some 15 kilometers away from La Paz. Carlos Mesa, who is in second place in the polls, will close his campaign in the country's interior. International observer missions have already arrived in Bolivia. 219 election observers will also oversee the voting process. And in the last hours, some 92 experts from the Organization of American States arrived in Bolivia and met with President Evo Morales.
According to a number of international bodies, one of the biggest achievements of President Evo Morales' time in power in Bolivia has been economic stability. Let's find out how this came to be.
Bolivia's economic stability is linked to a single word: nationalization, a process that started in 2006 by taking back the hydrocarbon industry, which strengthened the state.
Between $67 and $74 billion would have stopped entering the Bolivian state coffers. Imagine what could have been done, and with all that money for so long, and look what has been done over the past 12 years, ever since we nationalized the industry.
According to recent studies, a strong state economy has had great social impact, including the creation of 670,000 new jobs and the reduction of poverty from 38% to 15%.
We have spoken to Bolivians over the last few years about what they think of the economy, and many say they now see themselves as part of the middle class. 75% of our population believes they are part of the middle class, and less than 20% say they live in poverty.
Before nationalization, companies took 82% of oil revenues for themselves. Now it's the other way round, as the state gets that 82% and the companies get 18%. This has consolidated the central bank's reserves, and it is now able to finance large industrial projects.
If we look at the economic history of Bolivia, this whole process is new. Under the neoliberal model that ruled from 1985 until 2005, the central bank did not have a role in our economic development. More so, rules were written to exclude the central bank from this process. That's why the central bank was prohibited from financing the public sector.
International bodies have highlighted Bolivia's economic progress.
When you look at the long-term picture, Bolivia has maintained growth that stands well above the region's average. Bolivia has greatly reduced poverty in a short amount of time. That's not something that happens often around the world.
The economic stability is reflected in the rate for the US dollar, which has stayed around the same level for 8 years, and in inflation rates, which stand at 3% per year. As such, Bolivia's economic model has allowed the country to move forward and prosper.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Grenada is to table legislation at the next sitting of Parliament banning smoking in public places. Under the proposed law, public spaces will now be defined as all areas where the public gathers, including beaches and recreational spaces like parks and playgrounds. The proposed law would also restrict the importation, sale, and use of electronic cigarettes on the island.
Many cases of vaping-related respiratory illnesses and deaths are now being reported throughout the world, in many states in the U.S. And of course, the death toll is expected to rise as a result of the use of vaping and e-cigarettes. As it is now, the policies that will just ban smoking generally, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's tobacco, whether it's vaping, whether it's e-cigarettes, right? There will be no ban on the importation of cigarettes per se. The importation will be on the the ban will be on the importation of vaping e-cigarettes materials.
And in Guyana, the government has launched a commission of inquiry into a head-on collision between a police vehicle and a private car that left 5 dead, including a presidential guard. CCTV footage of the horrific accident reportedly shows when the police vehicle slammed into the car. At the time, the police car was heading to East Bank of Demerara to provide escort to President David Granger. All 4 occupants of the private vehicle were killed.
From a personal point of view, it was very distressing to see, 4 dead, 4 bodies on the road at that hour in the morning. Extremely distressing. I hope I never have to witness a scene like that before again. Literally 2 hours after the accident, I held a meeting of the National Security Committee yesterday morning, and that is when I directed that an officer of no lesser rank than Deputy Commissioner was to conduct the inquiry.
Jamaica's former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson is scheduled to undergo surgery this Wednesday after he fractured his right knee and hip. This follows a crash near his St. Andrew home on Monday evening. The 84-year-old was rushed to the Tony Thwaite wing of the University Hospital of the West Indies following the incident and was evaluated overnight by a medical team. A spokesperson for Patterson said he is expected to make a full recovery with the appropriate medical treatment.
Governments alone.
Moving on, the Cuban Vice President Salvador Valdez Mesa has announced new economic measures to be implemented on the island. In the face of the U.S. economic blockade on the Caribbean nation, the Cuban government has taken the decision to launch a series of economic measures to be implemented in commerce. In addition, certain tariff exemptions will be granted to importers of raw material, providing they are used for the development of domestic production. The Economy and Finance Minister Alejandro Gil Fernandez added that the measures would be applied gradually.
These measures, as the Vice President explained, are of a gradual nature. We've been studying the context and scenarios, and gradually and systematically implementing the measures that we consider will make a difference to our economic activity, which is being subject to serious restriction because of the economic, commercial, and financial blockade.
A shootout between security forces and armed civilians have left 15 people dead in the Mexican state of Guerrero. Authorities say 14 civilians and 1 soldier died in the gunfight near the city of Iguala, which is known for the 2014 disappearance of 43 Ayotzinapa students. This comes just a day after 13 policemen were killed in the neighboring state of Michoacán. Both states are among Mexico's most violent and lawless regions, where rivals drug cartels constantly fight to control smuggling routes. Argentina will hold its presidential election on October 27th. So what are the voters expecting? Our correspondent reports.
The loss of purchasing power, the need to create jobs, and the growth in poverty are some of the main economic issues that will be upmost in the minds of Argentinian voters when they cast their ballots at the end of the month.
I am worried that Macri might win again. I'm following it all. I see how things are in the streets. In fact, I work with a truck, and I see everything that is happening, and I am truly worried about Macri winning again.
The exchange rate, the economy, that is what worries me. The fact that my wage has dropped in dollars, if not in pesos.
Different opinion polls put Alberto Fernandez in the lead of close to 20 points, which means he could win in the first round.
It seems to me that after October 27th, more than anything, we have to regain hope that things can get better. The economic situation is very complicated, and it won't change overnight after the election. We have to rebuild many public policies that have been abandoned and create new ones. For example, we practically don't have a health ministry. How can we think that our country will improve and move forward while we are cutting back the state so that it cannot attend to the public?
Regards the whole electoral process with skepticism, anti-Kirchnerism is one of the main arguments of who will opt again for Mauricio Macri.
I don't believe in the opposition. I prefer the ill we know with the current administration, because at least it's transparent and there is no corruption.
I really believe that Mauricio Macri will do what he needs to do. I don't want the prisoners to come back, because I want a better future for this country.
One opinion poll indicates that 69% of voters, whatever their own preference, believe that Alberto Fernandez will win. We'll have to wait until October 27 to see if that is confirmed.
The Peruvian National Police prevented the progress of the March for the Day of Rural Women in Lima. The demonstration's purpose was to reach downtown Lima, where they hoped to meet with various national authorities. However, the march was halted by a police cordon that stopped its progress, despite the fact that the citizens were peacefully demonstrating and not interrupting the flow of traffic. Also, some women reported being abused by security forces while trying to head to the city center.
The other point that we are presenting in this proposal seeks to address the issues of violence, because there is a lot of violence. There are a lot of femicide in rural areas and within indigenous communities, which are not often noticed. There are women who are burned in their communities, and this is not known.
Peace talks between the Sudanese government and rebel forces have stalled before they even began, as one key rebel group says government forces continue attacking its territory.
Up to the point of writing this declaration, they have not issued any cessation facilities or ceasefire unilaterally. And this is one of our demands.
I reject and condemn what has happened, and the government will take its responsibility against those who are behind this incident, and will investigate this incident, and those who are behind it will be held accountable by the law.
South Africa's electricity company Eskom has apologized for the latest round of power cuts after supply to several parts of the country was disrupted throughout the day on Wednesday. In a statement, Eskom said its ability to generate power has been hit by maintenance problems. However, the utility company has a history of implementing scheduled blackouts designed to prevent a total collapse of the overstretched electricity grid. This as a result of an increase in demand, rising costs, falling revenues, and crumbling infrastructure. The United States has sent its top officials, including Vice President Mike Pence, to Turkey to persuade Ankara to stop its operation in northern Syria. This comes after Turkey dismissed sanctions imposed by the Trump administration as illegal and vowed to press on with its operation in Syria. Pence is expected to be accompanied by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. Meanwhile, the Turkish military has continued to strengthen fighting near its border with Syria. And Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan now says he will meet the U.S. Vice President when he arrives in the capital, Ankara, on Thursday. Earlier, he said he wouldn't and that he'd only talk to President Donald Trump about Turkey's military offensive in northeast Syria. Erdogan said he will decide whether to meet Trump next month after the meetings with Pence and his delegation.
The trip to the U.S. will be evaluated after talks with the delegations that will come here, because the arguments, debates, conversations being held in Congress regarding myself, my family, and my minister friends are a very big disrespect to Turkey. For the moment, I am not meeting anyone other than Pence and Pompeo.
And tensions remain high as the strategic border town of Kobani at the Syrian border might be exposed to clashes. According to reports, Russian and Syrian government forces have moved towards its outskirts, and Turkish forces were also moving towards the town. Soldiers carrying the Syrian flag were seen gathering around buses and military vehicles on a road believed to connect Kobani to Manjib.
Our mission is to protect our land from the Turkish occupier. Right now in Ain al-Arabi, we came to this area to stand with the residents, to protect the women, the children, the men and everyone from the Turkish criminals, who have no humanity, no morals, nothing.
And as Turkey is stepping up on its offensive in the Syrian border region, hundreds of people fleeing the fighting have arrived at a refugee camp in Iraq. Syrian elderly people, children and women were among the people arriving at a camp in Bardarash, a town in Iraq's Kurdish region. According to the United Nations, about 160,000 people have fled their homes as fighting continues.
We fled war, bombs, and bombardment. We want peace. We got out for the sake of those children. For the first time, we left our homes. Thank God the youth here welcomed us and received us well.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Canada's federal election is coming up, set for Monday, October 21st. And there's talk of a Liberal NDP coalition government if the Tories win. Our correspondent, Pablo Vivanco, has the details.
Advanced voting in Canada's elections finished yesterday, and what everyone is talking about now is the possibility of a coalition government. Now, the projections, according to the latest polls, have both the Conservatives and the ruling Liberal Party finishing in the area of 130 seats each, with the Bloc Québécois and the NDP within the range of 30-something seats each. The Green Party with 4 seats, according to these projections. Now, a party would need 170 seats in order to obtain a majority government. Both the Liberals and the NDP have hinted at the possibility of them joining together to form a coalition government so that the Conservatives are not able to form a government. This would be uncharted territory in Canada, which has not seen a coalition government since 1864, 3 years before the country was founded.
Thousands of demonstrators have once again filled the streets on the third day of protests over the jailing of 9 separatist leaders for their role in a failed 2017 independence bid. The pro-independence protesters are marching from Girona to Barcelona. Scores of people have been hurt and dozens arrested as police violently repressed protesters in Barcelona and other Catalan cities since demonstrations began. Late on Tuesday, police charged at hundreds of demonstrators who retaliated by hurling projectiles and set fire to rubbish bins and cardboard boxes. And as night fell, pro-independence protesters clashed with riot police in the center of Barcelona. Police fired foam bullets as protesters set fire to bins near the interior department of the regional government. Protesters also built barricades using pot pans against riot police. At least 3 security officers have been killed by a car bomb in Afghanistan, with more than 36 people injured. The bomb detonated near district headquarters in eastern Laghman province. Officials say about 20 children were wounded in the attack. It's not clear if the attack was a suicide bombing. No one has claimed responsibility for the incident.
Unfortunately, in this incident, 2 of our security forces members were martyred, and 6 other security forces members were slightly wounded. Also, beside the district governor's compound, there was a religious school where students were busy studying, and as a result of explosion, the school is damaged and 20 students were wounded from window glass and collapsed walls.
The Qatar government has announced new measures to end its controversial migrant worker restrictions. The country's labor minister, Yusuf Mohammed Fakhro, said Qatar plans to scrap controversial rules that require some workers to obtain permits to leave the country and block certain employees from changing companies without employers' permission. Human rights groups have said the previous system fueled abuses against migrants. Qatar wants to implement the reforms before it hosts the Soccer World Cup in 2022. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.